They were sworn to poverty, yet they owned the world. They were the soldiers of God, but they invented the banking system of the devil. From the deserts of Jerusalem to the vaults of Paris, they built an empire of debt. But on Friday the 13th, the king came for his money. This is not a story about religion. This is the story of the first financial crime in history. Welcome to the Knights Templar. Why do we fear Friday the 13th? For most, it is a superstition about bad luck. But for the historian of finance, it is a date etched in blood. It marks the most brutal corporate takeover in human history. On Friday, October 13th, 1307, the King of France launched a dawn raid that would make the FBI look amateur. His target wasn't a criminal gang or a foreign army. His target was the world's most powerful financial institution, the Knights Templar. You may know them as holy warriors, men of the sword protecting pilgrims in the Holy Land. But that is only the cover story. The truth is far more complex and far more profitable. The Knights Templar were the world's first multinational corporation. They invented modern banking concepts like the check, the safety deposit box, and the trust fund. They were the creditors to kings, the treasurers of popes, and the masters of a fleet that rivaled empires. At their peak, they owned the island of Cyprus, managed the treasury of France, and held more liquid assets than any European state. They were the Goldman Sachs, the BlackRock, and the IMF of the Middle Ages, all rolled into one militarized order. But their story is not just about wealth. It is about the deadly danger of lending money to people who have the power to burn you at the stake. This is the story of how 9 poor knights became the masters of the world's gold, and how debt, jealousy, and a corrupt king destroyed them. This is the ultimate financial true crime. To understand their fall, we must understand their humble beginnings. The order was founded in 1119, 2 decades after the First Crusade captured Jerusalem. The roads to the Holy City were dangerous. Pilgrims were routinely robbed, kidnapped, or killed by bandits. A French nobleman named Hugues de Payens approached King Baldwin II of Jerusalem with a proposal, a monastic order dedicated solely to protecting these travelers. They were granted a headquarters on the Temple Mount, the ruins of Solomon's Temple. This gave them their name, the Poor Fellow Soldiers of Christ and of the Temple of Solomon. Note the word poor. In the beginning, they were destitute. Their seal depicted 2 knights riding a single horse because they couldn't afford one each. They relied on donations for food and clothing. But this poverty was about to become their greatest marketing asset. In 1129, at the Council of Troyes, the Templars received the official blessing of the Catholic Church. A prominent monk, Bernard of Clairvaux, became their PR manager. He wrote a manifesto praising them, framing them as a new kind of warrior, monks who could kill without sin. Donations began to pour in. But not just small coins. Nobles who wanted to buy their way into heaven donated massive estates, farms, and entire villages to the order. In a feudal society, land was wealth. And the Templars were accumulating it at a staggering rate. But land is a liquid. You cannot pay an army with dirt to turn this land into power. The Templars had to invent a financial system that the world had never seen before. The crusading economy had a massive problem: logistics. A pilgrim traveling from London to Jerusalem had to carry months' worth of gold coins. This made them walking targets. If they were robbed by bandits, they were fleeced by local money changers and corrupt ship captains. The Templars saw a gap in the market. They created a financial product that changed the world, the letter of credit. Here is how it worked. A pilgrim could walk into the Templar headquarters in London, the London Temple, and deposit his life savings. The knights would count the gold and give him a piece of parchment. This document was encoded with a cipher known only to the Templar masters. It stated the amount deposited and the identity of the pilgrim. The pilgrim could then travel across Europe and the Middle East without a single coin in his pocket. When he arrived in Jerusalem, he would present his letter to the local Templar preceptor. They would decode the message, verify the funds, and hand him the equivalent value in local currency. This was revolutionary. It was the ancestor of the modern traveler's check, the ATM, and the SWIFT transfer system. For the first time, capital could move across borders without physically moving. Of course, the Templars didn't provide this service for free. They charged transaction fees. And more importantly, they realized a fundamental banking truth: not everyone withdraws their money at the same time. The London Temple wasn't just a vault, it was a bank holding massive reserves of idle capital. Capital that could be put to work. By the mid-12th century, the poor fellow soldiers were poor no more. In 1139, Pope Innocent II issued a papal bull called Omni Datum Optimum. It was a corporate dream come true. This document granted the Templars total exemption from paying taxes. They could cross borders without paying customs duties. They answered to no king, no bishop, and no local lord. They answered only to the Pope. Imagine a corporation today that pays zero tax, ignores all national borders, has its own private army, and answers only to a figurehead who lives in another country. That was the power of the Templar Order. They built a vast network of preceptories, essentially bank branches, across Europe. From Scotland to Spain, they operated over 9,000 manors. They owned shipping fleets that monopolized the Mediterranean trade routes. They transported pilgrims, spices, and silk. They were the Amazon of the Middle Ages, controlling both the logistics and the payment processing. But their most lucrative business was lending. The Catholic Church strictly forbade usury, charging interest on loans. It was considered a mortal sin. The Templars, however, were masters of financial engineering. They found loopholes. Instead of charging interest, they would lend money to a landowner in exchange for the rent of his land for a certain period. Or, they would lend an amount but require repayment in a different currency, manipulating the exchange rate to hide their profit. They became the primary lenders to Europe's monarchs. When King Henry III of England wanted to buy the island of Sicily, he didn't go to his nobles, he pawned the crown jewels to the Templars. Wealth attracts envy, but debt creates enemies. By the year 1300, the Crusades were effectively over. The Templars had lost their foothold in the Holy Land. Jerusalem had fallen. Their original purpose, protecting pilgrims, was gone. But their bank was bigger than ever. They were now a paramilitary financial organization with no war to fight, sitting in the heart of Europe. Their headquarters in Paris, the Temple, was a massive fortress that served as the actual treasury for the French monarchy. Enter King Philip IV of France, also known as Philip the Fair. He was a man with grand ambitions and an empty wallet. Wars against England and Flanders had drained the French treasury. Philip was desperate. He had already debased the currency, reducing the silver content of coins, which caused rampant inflation and riots in Paris. In fact, during one riot, he had to flee his palace and take refuge inside the Templar fortress, the very bank he owed money to. Philip was drowning in debt to the Templars. He owed them massive sums that he could never repay. He had already tried other financial solutions. He had expelled the Jews from France and seized their assets. Then he expelled the Lombard bankers and seized their money. But it wasn't enough. The hole in his budget was too deep. He looked at the Templars and saw two things: a creditor he couldn't pay, and a pile of gold that could solve all his problems. But you cannot simply rob the Pope's private army. He needed a reason. He needed to destroy their reputation before he could steal their wealth. He needed a conspiracy theory. King Philip had a henchman, a lawyer named Guillaume de Nogaret. Nogaret was the master of propaganda, a medieval spin doctor. If Philip was the godfather, Nogaret was his consigliere. Together, they concocted a dossier of accusations that were designed to shock the medieval mind. They didn't accuse the Templars of financial crimes or corruption; that would have been boring. They accused them of heresy. They enlisted a former Templar who had been kicked out of the order, a man named Esquin de Florin, to spread rumors. The whispers began to circulate in the courts of Europe. They said the Templars denied Christ. They said that during their secret initiation ceremonies, they spat on the cross. They rumored that the Knights worshipped a severed head or a demonic idol named Baphomet. They accused them of sodomy and dark magic. These accusations were carefully chosen. Heresy was the one crime that could strip the Templars of their papal protection. If they were heretics, their property could be seized by the crown. It was a classic asset forfeiture scheme disguised as a religious crusade. Philip moved with terrifying secrecy. He sent sealed letters to every bailiff and seneschal in France. The orders were strict: do not open until the night of October 12th. The coordination required was immense, executed without a single leak, a feat of logistical brilliance. On the morning of Friday, October 13th, 1307, the trap snapped shut. Across France, in a synchronized operation, soldiers broke down the doors of Templar preceptories. The Knights were caught completely off guard. They were skilled warriors, but they were not expecting a war at home. Most were unarmed, waking up in their beds. Philip's men arrested hundreds of Templars, including the Grand Master, Jacques de Molay. The king immediately seized the Paris temple. He finally had his hands on the treasury. But according to some historical accounts, he was disappointed. The vaults were not as full as he expected. Had the Templars been tipped off? Legend says that a fleet of Templar ships left the port of La Rochelle the night before, carrying the bulk of their gold and artifacts. Where they went remains one of history's greatest mysteries: Scotland? Portugal? The Americas? But for the Knights left behind, the horror was just beginning. Philip needed confessions. He handed the Knights over to the Dominican Inquisitors. The torture methods were horrific. Knights were stretched on the rack. Their feet were burned until the bones fell out. They were starved and beaten. Under this unimaginable pain, they confessed to everything. Yes, we spat on the cross. Yes, we worshipped the cat head. Yes, we denied God. The Grand Master, Jacques de Molay, initially confessed under torture. But later, in a moment of supreme courage, he retracted his confession. He declared that the charges were lies and that the order was pure. This act sealed his fate. For 7 years, the Knights languished in dungeons while the legal battles raged. The Pope, Clement V, was weak and under Philip's control. He tried to investigate, finding that many charges were baseless, but Philip threatened him with military force. In 1312, the Pope officially dissolved the Order of the Knights Templar. On March 18, 1314, Jacques de Molay and the Preceptor of Normandy were brought to a small island in the Seine River in Paris. A pyre was built. They were to be burned alive as relapsed heretics. As the flames rose around him, Jacques de Molay did not scream for mercy. According to legend, he stared directly at the royal palace and shouted a curse that would echo through history. God knows who is wrong and has sinned. Soon a calamity will occur to those who have condemned us to death. Pope Clement, King Philip, I summon you to appear before the tribunal of God within a year. The crowd watched in silence as the old Grand Master burned to ash. But the true terror came later. 1 month later, Pope Clement died of a painful disease. 7 months later, King Philip IV, the Iron King, suffered a stroke while hunting and died at the age of 46. Philip's 3 sons all ruled briefly and died without male heirs, ending the Capetian dynasty that had ruled France for centuries. The curse, it seemed, was real. The Knights Templar were destroyed, but their legacy survived. The idea that a financial organization could operate above borders, protected by secrecy and complex structures, became the blueprint for modern banking. In Portugal, the Templars simply changed their name to the Order of Christ and protected the explorers like Vasco da Gama who opened the trade routes to India. In Switzerland, the fierce independence and banking secrecy laws bear a striking resemblance to Templar protocols. Today, when you use a traveler's check, a bank trust, or transfer money internationally, you are using a system designed by warrior monks 900 years ago. King Philip IV thought he could kill the debt by killing the bankers. He succeeded in destroying the men, but he could not destroy the idea. The Templars proved that in the game of empires, gold is sharper than steel. But debt is the deadliest weapon of all. They were the first masters of the universe, and their ghost still haunts the vaults of the global financial system. The temple is gone, but the bank never closed.